chapter on corruption. Okay, pardon me. Got
Sorry
it.
for it.
So, should I begin again?
Yeah.
So we're going to discuss the last, I guess, 4 or 3 parts of the book. The chapter on apocalypse was originally part of the chapter on corruptio optavia pessima that just grew and grew and grew and grew until it became 2 chapters. I sent you around the engagement of my epistolary friend, Brother John at Taizé. We are only known to each other in the last year, but he's been a very welcome interlocutor. And he made me wonder if I could have been clearer in distinguishing Illich, the non-apocalyptic thinker, from Illich, the apocalyptic thinker, because obviously the non-apocalyptic thinker is the apocalyptic thinker, according to, I would think, all Orthodox Christians' interpretation. And perhaps I got a little hung up on the word, as one will, because if it has a certain meaning, how are you going to, and then you specify your meaning that you will use, you don't banish the other meaning, it keeps creeping back in, it's always there, will you be misunderstood? But of course, it's just as easy to be misunderstood saying he's a non-apocalyptic thinker, when I don't disagree at all with Brother John that Illich's work can be understood in his sense as an apocalypse. I don't know how many read that essay, but I do continue to differ from him in my feeling about the book of Revelation. I think it has an undertone of resentment. I think it has an undertone of revenge. And reading it symbolically, which obviously any contemporary person would do, it's not possible to read it as a thing that was about to happen in the year 100 or whenever it was written. Was it around 100?
Yeah, that's what they say.
Maybe
at the end of the century.
So yeah, so there I disagree with him, and there I'm strongly influenced by Carl Jung, a book called Answer to Job, which has always been important to me. I don't know if any of you know it, but Jung, in this short book, which he wrote later in his life in the 1950s, argued essentially that that Job is the better man than God, to put it in very simple terms, and that is clearly revealed in the book of Job. It's quite unconscionable how God behaves, making bets with his dark son to torture his faithful servant, and so on, and then making his big bullying speech at the end to cow Job into submission. And Job says, "I put my hand across my mouth. I'm not going to say anything. You're the boss." But so that was very important to Jung, because obviously it revealed the problem of the shadow side of God, or the evil that is seemingly in God, or at least is visited on us in a creation ex nihilo. And his whole idea is that it's with the book of Job that you see the archetype of the Son of Man begin to constellate. Constellate would be Jung's expression for something taking shape intrapsychically, evident in Ezekiel's vision of the Son of Man, the senescent God that you also see in William Blake's art, and the radiant man, and also in Daniel's vision, and finally taking shape in the incarnation. But the problem, according to Jung, has not been dealt with. The God has solved the problem by becoming man in part, but he still takes the form of an all-good son. We still don't know where the evil comes from. And so for Jung, he sees it expressing itself in an unconscious way, in a vision, in the Apocalypse of John, where the theme of revenge is, for me, quite pronounced. I mean, it begins with the berating of the 7 churches that are in Asia, and it continues with its lakes of fire and sulfur and I mean, it's not just the wrath of the Lamb signifying Good Friday, as Brother John says. It's Christ on his white horse with the sword in his teeth. It can all be read symbolically, yes, but it has a spirit of resentment in it, according to me. So we differ about that. I don't think we differ about anything else. I think Illich's work is very well understood as an apocalypse, in fact, and it's certainly true that what I call the non-apocalyptic Illich is the apocalyptic Illich in his terms. What I was trying to do was distance him, as he distanced himself throughout his life, from this, what John says, like he would prefer. I called it the mythological apocalypse. And you know, I mean, it's in Paul as a precise description of what Christians still believe to be the coming rapture, with the trumpet and the whole works. And it's hard for me to believe that that was all understood symbolically at the time. It's still not understood symbolically by many of us. Since it's been a lifelong struggle for me how to read the scriptures. Anyway, so I tried to make that clear and to see what could be done with it. The sense in which Illich is an apocalyptic thinker is obviously the sense in which I think all Christians must be apocalyptic thinkers, that they believe the cat has been set among the pigeons. And I like the story about Ivan that I tell in the book about the nun that so enchanted him when she asked him why God doesn't speak to us anymore. And then she said, maybe he's got nothing left to say, or whatever it was, nothing else to say. I think that because it came so close to something that Ivan himself could have said, right? That the word has been spoken. The word is present and with us, and that inevitably sets what I daren't call a process, but would like to name somehow, in motion. And what I think Jung sees, if I can try and tie all this together, this is a little bit off the cuff. What I think Jung sees, I think Illich also sees, which is, although I don't think Illich had any acquaintance with Jung that I ever knew about, and just, I think, thought of him as another psychologist. Once or twice lumps him together with Freud as if they were quite the same. That the shadow is being suppressed, is being denied. I'm still waiting for some competent New Testament scholar to tell me if there's any merit in Ivan's reading of what prophecy means in the New Testament, that these prophets were alert for Antichrist, were aware of the evil that could and would nest, to take his word, in the church. I never found that persuasive. I found a student of Walter Ong's called Kelber, who wrote the oral and the written gospel, whose idea of what prophets did in early Christian communities was to transmit the spoken word, to transmit the word of God, to pass it on until such time as the decision was taken to write it. But anyway, whatever was the case, it was Ivan's view that the shadow was eventually overlooked and effectively forgotten by the institutional church, although it constantly recurs. But here I would be interested to know if others have other reading. The book by he was at the University of Chicago, I'm losing his name now, who wrote a book on the legend of Antichrist, which I relied on.
Wink?
No.
Not Martin Marty.
No. Anyway, we can look it up. It's not important. Walter Wink was important to me in understanding Illich, but I don't think Illich knew Wink. Although Wayne and I shared a wonderful morning with Walter Wink at a colloquium on violence and religion conference, where he set several gospel stories into action.
He did. With all these academics present, David.
It was a wonderful morning. Anyway, we can talk about that later. But so I would say that Ivan, in a certain sense, agrees with Jung. And this I tried to call a tragic understanding of Christianity. I'd be happy to have counsel on whether that succeeded with anyone, drawing a little bit on Unamuno and the tragic sense of life, and also the agony of Christianity, that a tragic view lives always with the knowledge that the word can never be announced without its shadow appearing with it, that is the worldly condition. And so, although Ivan had no great sympathy for Simone Weil, and I think it was a sorrow to Lee Chojnacki, his great friend and companion, who read Weil a lot, but Ivan brushed her aside. And I think I told the story earlier. One day there was a book with a picture of Simone Weil on the cover on the table, and Lee said, Ivan pushed it away, and he said, "She reminds me of my mother." in a tone that it didn't sound like he wanted to be reminded of his mother at that point. So, but Weil, in a passage in the notebooks that I had a great influence on me, says essentially, I'm going to paraphrase. This isn't exactly what she says. She says that Christians ought to have been very discreet about the resurrection. He doesn't deny the resurrection. Neither does she pretend to understand what it might mean. But she says they ought to have, in a way, regarded it as esoteric knowledge. She doesn't say that. I'm making that up. But discreet, I don't know if she uses that word, but I like the word. And that the reason they ought to have been discreet was to moderate, dampen down the spirit of triumph, of victory. Who o'ercame the cross and grave, sinners for to redeem and save. The whole feeling that the story's over, the victory's won, and what remains for the Christians to do but bring the whole world to heel, to devise the system of pedagogy that will bring everyone within this evolving church, within this evolving good news, within this. And indeed, that's exactly what's happened. That's the world that we live in. And that's the mystery of evil. That's which I think I'm not telling you, any of you, anything that you don't already know, but that's the phrase that Ivan adopts from 2 Thessalonians, translated in the Vulgate as the Mysterium Iniquitatis. But I think the Greek word, I'll accept correction here, is anomos, which is the man of the mystery of lawlessness, in fact. But even like the Mysterium Iniquitatis, and sometimes spoken English as the mystery of evil, which is that the injunction to preach to all nations happens predominantly, certainly not entirely, in this subterranean or in this other register. It enters, in a sense, the back door. And I mean, that's how I've come to see it anyway. And he must have meditated on this all his life. He says that when he got to Puerto Rico in 1956, and almost innocent of the idea of schooling, never having given it any thought at all as a kind of programmatic reality. He'd been in and out of schools, and he saw them as practical means of learning in certain cases. The building of the school system in Puerto Rico, he said he almost instantly smelled the church, that this was a liturgical procedure, and was believed in as such. And the idea pervades deschooling society, but it's never made the dominant note. It's always, he never says that he's doing anything other than making a proposal to disestablish education. But there are constant references to liturgy, to church, to a world church, to services, and so on. So the idea was there all along, but it seemingly was only in speaking to me in 1998 that he finally said that this was an apocalyptic view of reality, that this had been coming to fruition, was coming to fruition, and was now, I think he dared to say, breaking its shell, or he said, I won't say it's breaking its shell, because he knew too much of apocalyptic rhetoric, and yet he does say that it's breaking its shell. So he tries to embody his reticence while at the same time saying it. So clearly he saw this as a kind of maximum. Now there's always more, seemingly, and we don't know what's going on ever. But he did, and now this brings me to a question which Marcus sent, asking me what Illich was afraid of, what he was afraid could happen, and also more mysteriously, not afraid would happen. But afraid would happen. I think he was a man who lived pretty much as far as he could in the present. He wasn't just popping off when he said, to hell with the future. The future is a man-eating idol, that we need to live in the present. We need to celebrate in the present. The edge of time for us is in the present. He uses the expression, the edge of time, in an essay called How Will We Pass on Christianity? And so I don't think the future was what he was ever talking about. You can find prediction. You can, that if this advice, this counsel is not taken in Tools for Conviviality, all normative bridges to the past will be broken. I mean, just a terrifying statement. Or a technological shell, a bubble with no way out, a completely enclosed reality. He can imagine people who have become utterly deaf to any entreaty from beyond the techno-scientific world in which they are living.
The Truman Show.
Mm-hmm.
The Truman Show.
Is that sorry, I'm not getting your word.
The Truman Show.
Oh,
the,
yeah. Oh,
the film.
that was a movie in which that was the case.
Yeah.
Well, I hope he never saw it. It's very unlikely that he did.
Except that he walked out.
Eventually,
He was able to walk out.
Yeah.
So I think, Marcus, that's all. It's the future seen in the present that concerned him. I don't think he ever thought about the future otherwise, or felt that was any of his business. At least that's my impression. So if this is the case, then I think, certain hopeful consequences follow from it. I think it's easier to see. It should be easier to see what is the case. It should be easier to convince my colleagues at the CBC, for example, although in fact it isn't, that they've gone as far as they can go on the road they're on, that they need to look around, sniff the wind, and say, we could do better than we do. We could start telling more of the truth than we dare to tell now. We could stop preaching, for example, if this is in the end, if what there's a, I'm just wandering now, but there's a passage in an essay in Shadow Work that Ivan, one of his, I think it's the first essay in the book, and what I called this devising the pedagogy which will bring the whole world, which will be extended to the whole world, he calls bringing the other in, that the Christianity has always been about bringing the other in. And he goes through a sequence of steps from the barbarian other of the Roman Greek imagination, all the way to the underdeveloped other of the development era, which he was particularly concerned with at the time he wrote, that always the same missionary project is occurring. And it seems to me that the CBC, for example, is still in the last tired vestiges of that, even though you'd be hard pressed to find a Christian amongst them, or an explicit Christian amongst them. They are the most Christian of people in that respect. They're so much more Christian than the Christians that I really think we so much need new eyes, new words, new terminology to express this reality. And some days it seems just palpable to me that this could be done, but in the event, it's never as easy as it is in one's dreams or fantasies. But I think it's patent that René Girard once spoke about a race of super Christians, and certainly that what people call the woke, which is not a favorite expression of mine, but is I think they are the race of, they're, to the extent that that's a real phenomenon, they are the race of super Christians. And I think need to be made aware of themselves as such, which can only be done by the actual Christians. So that's not much of a summary of the Apocalypse chapter, very rambling. I am interested, if I can hear from people about this idea of a tragic view of Christianity, because I think it, it was, to me, all his life, he insisted on this, that the church as she, the church as it, all the whole sequence of distinctions, that the heavenly, the otherworldly reality, which he's embodying as an alter Christus at the Mass, must be strictly separated from any role he's playing as a politician, which he always did, right? Whenever he thought he had a political role, he immediately renounced or suspended at least any priestly role. So this distinction was made throughout his life in order to protect the word from any closure, from any reification, from any institutionalization unaware of itself as such, because he never, and no one could believe that you could get away without institutionalization. If there hadn't been institutionalization, we wouldn't even have the gospel, as he himself pointed out. But it could be self-aware. And to the extent that it isn't self-aware, it falls into sin. So that was always the note from celebration of awareness on, of awareness. So I'm interested in that. As far as the other chapters are concerned, I don't know how much to say about them. The story about his illness and his death, I thought ought to be told. And I hoped it would also clarify my strictures on biography, that it's not that we needn't know about one another. It's that we oughtn't to try and take positions above one another, or to pretend to some scientific viewpoint. So I wanted to tell that story, and I think it was also illustrates what I mean in the conclusion to the book, when I say that he is meaningful to me as an example, by which I mean something absolutely concrete, something like a perfectly individual, perfectly individualized, not that anyone would do what he did, but through him might understand something about themselves, something about the situation they're in, something about the life that they're living. And so it was for me. So the other point that's emphasized in the conclusion is complementarity, and that was a surprise to me. It was probably an idea that I had for the second half of my life, and I used to joke. I can't remember if I said this to you all before, but I had a colleague called Max Allen, and we used to talk a lot about what we did at Ideas. But the that my philosophy was you can't win. And it doesn't really sound like much of a philosophy, really. It's not what people usually mean by philosophy, but its components the components of the thought would go back. One strand goes back to Lao Tzu when he says, "Conduct your triumph as a funeral." It's part of the Tao Te Ching. So that you lose in winning, you win in losing. Automatically, that's our condition. That's not something that happens when you make a mistake. It's why the absence of sportsmanship or sportswomanship from professional sports is so egregious, because the beauty of the game is lost, and the reality that the loser and the winner are all compact. They're all one thing. You can't be the winner without the loser is lost. All we care about is the victory celebration, and maybe we show the long face of the loser, and so on. But this idea of you can't win, of a reality that is always compensated, that's the only way that we know that a world can exist. That is the essence of necessity. And according to Nicholas of Cusa, who that's another strand in the thought, who says in the vision of God that God appears to us as a complexio oppositorum, as a complex of opposites. And he says this, and he has the figure of the wall of paradise, which is a horizon. It's a wall, but it's a horizon in the way he portrays it. But there is intercourse going on with beyond the wall. There are angels coming in and out. But the implication, or at least the one I took, is that is going on in silence. That's going on in darkness. That's going on in a language we haven't learned to speak yet. And so for us, the wall is a limit, and at that wall, God is a complex of opposites, even though we may suppose that that's not all there is of God by any means. So that was important to me. And gradually I began to realize that I could see this throughout Illich's work. I mean, it's obvious in gender. He speaks there about complementarity a little bit. He says that social science, for example, should have been based on a philosophy of complementarity, but wasn't, because positive universal categories were devised. So, and then he mentions a whole sequence of people, perhaps a little unfair to Marcel Mauss, on into Levi-Strauss and so on. But there you see that there can be no universal language. That's what he believed. And gender is the figure of it, that we are always more than the other one can imagine. That it isn't just that men and women are more than each other can imagine. That's just a way of grounding or instantiating or also understanding, because it's very real in the relations between men and women that this happens. So and he, I think, probably gave too little credit to the natural reality of it, because he was so eager to not be understood as an essentialist. He wanted to be understood as saying that gender was a universal format or a universal structure, but it was never the same in any two places and could be quite opposite in different places. So it wasn't that it was innate in us. He even tried to convince me once that he knew of a place where women spoke with low voices and men spoke with high voices. But if there is such a place, it's only one. So it's there in gender, but I came to the conclusion it's there everywhere. That as soon as that, really, if you tools for conviviality, which is as close as he ever comes to a programmatic statement about technology tools, there always has to be an opposite domain. There always have to be balances there, and it's never a fixed. It's always a dynamic balance. There's never, you can't specify a fixed point at which things balance. It's always how to dance, how to compensate, how to keep the other one, the other thing, the other domain alive, respected, acknowledged. And now that's sort of how I see the world. So there was perhaps a danger that I would see myself in Ivan's mirror, but I think I can make a plausible case that he is, all his talk about domains and does fit that complementarity is his philosophy, and that it seems to be, to me, I'll conclude that it's the most needful idea, because we're still living in the spirit of positivity, which may or may not be a corrupted Christian heritage. It seems to me that it is, and I find great solace in that thought, because it always leaves open the possibility of returning to the source, of reimagining, of rethinking, of overcoming that spirit. But I think what we've seen, just to take a trivial example, not that trivial, but an immediate example, in the pandemic, is the attempt to sort of re-establish, reify some idol called science, which isn't even science. It's not even what scientists think is science. It's a tin God, but it's all positive. It's all right. It knows everything. And the harm that's being done through making people feel stupid, and then they start to act stupid or stupider because they're made to feel stupid. I mean, it's just the dynamics of it are so egregious. I'll just close with one thing, since this has happened since we last spoke. The CBC, you'll pardon me for bringing the CBC into this. The CBC, through the Fifth Estate, had a full hour on the convoy. It dealt with policing problems. It dealt with whether their intelligence was adequate. It dealt with whether the truckers' movement was infiltrated. How was it infiltrated? Was Steve Bannon actually hiding under one of those trucks? And so on, all taken very seriously. Not whether Steve Bannon was under one of the trucks, but what they, in the whole hour, the idea that those people could have been there for the reason they said they were there. And all their crazy fancies about the World Economic Forum, that was taken very seriously too. But what they said they were there for, no, couldn't be. It couldn't be that they were concerned about vaccine mandates. That was never. I mean, the harm that can be done in that way, right? Enforcing, and we're going to reap the whirlwind. People don't just make up, if the establishment makes up a bunch of fairy tales and then starts saying that all the other people who make up counter fairy tales are confabulators and should be thrown into prison. I noticed that today also we had news that an Ontario member of Parliament has been charged as well. So this is all sowing the wind as far as I'm concerned. And the whirlwind will surely be reaped from it. But anyway, it seems like that spirit of positivity has to somehow be bracketed, overcome, counteracted. Here endeth the lesson. You take over, Marcus.
Amen.
Me? Oh boy.
Thank you, Catherine.
Oh boy. I mean, I do have a question. I don't know if it's but I don't know if it's why I should presume to take the direction of the conversation from here. I think let's open it up. Folks have been listening. Folks have been reading.
But Marcus, you do
we
have
may
a
gather
question.
again in some way with.
There.
Yeah, I do, but I'm happy to put mine on the back burner if there's others with more burning questions.
I just had a comment. David had said something about Miguel de Unamuno and his your take on the tragic sense. I've been reminded of this lately, watching some of the coverage out of Ukraine. Miguel de Unamuno, in A Tragic Sense of Life, talked about to worship is to weep together in the streets, and watching, the people, in the war zone there in Ukraine. But it I made that connection too in the reading, because I think I'm beginning to understand, just beginning to understand the implications of Illich in terms of the Western experiment kind of as a corruption of Christianity. I think I'm only beginning to make those connections, David, and I found chapters 12 and 13 and 14 among some of the best that I read. Maybe it's because they're more theological in tone or something, and I could relate better without having read a lot of Illich. But the other thing I would, and so that tragic sense of life and Unamuno's sort of existential sort of frame, I think it fits. I think it complements that apocalyptic vision that you've tried to articulate here in Illich. The other thing that I really appreciated, and I was reminded of, and in two pages, I think it's on 407, 408, or 408, 409. You talk about Anselm of Canterbury and the satisfaction theory of the atonement, and Peter Abelard's view, which I don't know whether Wayne, you probably have read this, but
Just
What-
Vengeance.
God, yeah,
God's Just Vengeance by Timothy Gorange. Yeah.
by Timothy Gorange, right? And he, he elucidates that in, I don't know how many pages. I remember slugging through, his work on kind of medieval theology, but I, for me, that's been a touchstone for my understanding of the atonement. And David, you summed it up really in 2 pages here, and in a way that I think really gets to that dilemma at the heart of contemporary Christianity in many ways, and I was intrigued by the fact, and I'm not surprised at all, but intrigued that Illich sees himself very much in the tradition of Abelard, and particularly because you don't make that connection explicitly, but you talk about it a little later on, because of his understanding of the prophetic vocation being supplanted by friendship in the contemporary world, right? And I think that's in some measure where Abelard ends up, in his understanding, which was not juridical, but highly relational and built on friendship and grace and all those gifts that come when you stop thinking outside of an institutional frame, right?
Well, the great Maimonides said, Hugh, when you punish someone, you thereby make him your friend. I think that's what you're getting at.
Anyway, I don't know whether you want to comment on that, but I found those, both the reference to unamuno and that very brief but potent analysis of Abelard, or Anselm and Abelard, to be quite compelling.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, Gorange was my inspiration. That was. I think we may have discovered that book at the same time. It was certainly when I was doing the Expanding Prison, around the time you and I became friends, that I discovered it. Yeah. So thank you. Even
Thank
in
you.
Abelard, I think there's probably more than I knew. He said he wanted to write a novel on Abelard. He says there would have been a scene in the tavern. He would have had Gratian, the old monk, who was the beginning of the reformulation of canon law, overhearing the conversation and so on. Right? So he describes it all. So I think Abelard was fairly important to him amongst a host of other thinkers at that same time.
I'll venture to pull together some thoughts, having revisited gender, the chapter on gender, at the same time as I was reading Apocalypse, and the idea of complementarity. And I think it will be my response to the question of the gospel as tragedy, but also bring together the impulse of Illich to see the church not as supplanting mythology. In order to be in that space of complementarity, you can't be in the binary, linear, logical realm, which we're presently in, but I just think of it as the mythic realm. And I'm going to dare to bring in the inklings that I am somewhat familiar with. Matthew, you can help me a little bit too if I kind of get stuck. But I was reminded of, that in Shakespeare there is the tragicomedy, that there's the complementary move of, or Fry, his circular journey where you rise and you fall and you rise again. The the movement of both the tragic and the comic is the full quest. And so in Tolkien, there's this idea of the eucatastrophe. And I was just Googling it quickly to see if I could find it online. So I found a Tolkien gateway thanks to the quick search, but here's his idea of what it is. It's a massive turn in fortune, using the EU to mean the Greek for good and the sudden turn, catastrophe. In essence, a eucatastrophe is a massive turn in fortune from a seemingly unconquerable situation to an unforeseen victory, usually brought by grace rather than heroic effort. And that reminded me of how Christianity at its best was grace perfecting nature. It was you called it a supplement, that things were taken up into this new way of being. The mythical was taken up into this new way of being. And so I'm a symbolic thinker. So I've got this idea of the cross and a circle around it. But the linear and the vertical somehow bring together both the circular and of the mythic mind and that line, the linear line of the modern mind together. And is it possible in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, there is the Steward of Gondor who has this circular device that it's like a polished gem in which he can gaze and see some of the future, but he takes it to be all of the future. And in thinking that what he sees in the globe is the whole of it, he falls into despair and commits himself to the pyre and tries to burn it all down. Like he tries to take the whole of the beautiful kingdom of Gondor, which is at the center of Middle Earth, down it's self-defeating. As Mordor is at the gates, the evil is at the gates, he wants to burn it down from within because of gazing into the Palantir and seeing some of what was to come, but not allowing that he was only seeing in part, seeing darkly rather than seeing face to face. And I think what Tolkien is, it stayed with me as a reminder through all personal moments of gloom and doom and political moments like ours right now, as you described it, as remembering we only see in part, and there is grace that is perfecting nature, and that there's the surprise. There's surprise in it, and tragedy doesn't allow, I think, for the surprise. One other thought came to me was The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. I don't know if you know this book. Does anyone know Ian McGilchrist?
I've read it, yeah. I've read it.
Okay, so you're reading this, and complementarity and the spherical versus the binary difference, Derrida's, theme of post-structuralism, which really is just hyper-structuralism of just this linear, infinite slippage of sign never meeting up with, the signifier never meeting up with the signifier. It reminded me of the idea of these two hemispheres of the mind that Ian McGilchrist is unpacking in this book, where he says about the left hemisphere, it is the ideal representation, the enemy of the right hemisphere. It's this left hemisphere, the ideal representation rather than embodied fact, of rationalism rather than intuition, of explicitness rather than the implicit, of what is static rather than what is moving, of what is fixed rather than what is changing. And he sees the left hemisphere as spinning out the modern constitution, or the modern world, where it has lost its role as servant to the right hemisphere, which is the intuitive, mythical, spherical hemisphere. And his proposal is that the comedy, Shakespeare's comedies, which value community and the return to something new broke through, that it ends in the ring dance. And I was reminded of how you were delighted by Richard Carney's definition of perichoresis, the Trinity, and how it's the ring dance that is at the heart, the root, the end of all things. So I'm on the side of eucatastrophe and tragicomedy. I don't know if that's something that you can run with, but there are my thoughts.
Well, I think that's really beautiful. And tragedy is not the right word. It was, I was trying things, I guess, because obviously Ivan was playing in a comedy, and I would think all Christians are playing in a comedy finally. And if you think of Shakespeare, I mean, I think your point is good, because obviously what's the difference between the tragedies and the comedies? It's just the ending, really, right? I mean, what is Twelfth Night a happy story? Yeah, there's very few of the comedies that aren't tragedies with an uptick at the end. So yeah, I think it's the image that Bill Cavanaugh probably gave me is better, right? The clowns playing in the midst of the tragedy, in Ariadne of Naxos, is probably better than the idea. He certainly didn't have he had a tragic view only in a very limited sense. It's a little like saying that he was non-apocalyptic. It's you hope that you'll be understood and that people will take it further. Yeah, but that's yeah, I love what you've said, and I think it's true about the Steward of Gondor, and it carries right on to the end of the story. I mean, the ending, well, not the ending, but the first ending, the destruction of the ring, right? When only Gollum can finish the job, right? Frodo would never have done it. In the end, he's overcome, and only the evil one who's trailed him the whole way can finish the job. I mean, that's quite something, isn't it?
And
Notice that it's also in a lake of fire that the ring is destroyed.
Yes. Yes. I noticed it.
but it's significant maybe that Gollum is able to finish the job only because of the mercy that had been previously shown to him by Frodo.
Yes, that's even better. Yeah.
I'll mention this book that maybe we all have read and known of. It's a short book
Buechner,
by
yeah.
Buechner. The subtitle of it, Telling
Hold
the
it
Truth.
up again, Wayne.
Oh, sorry. Telling the
up again.
Truth.
Yeah.
Can you see? Telling the Truth,
Yeah.
the Gospel is tragedy, comedy, and fairy tale.
Oh, nice.
And a little inside flap. Here's what is said about the book. That the preacher has to learn to disdain equally saccharine happy endings and soft-boiled hope. Rather, the Gospels record the tragedy of human failure, the comedy of being loved overwhelmingly by God despite that failure, and the fairy tale of transformation through that love. And that brings Tolkien back in, because what you quoted, Catherine, is the epilogue of On Fairy Tales, right? That Tolkien brings that idea that eucatastrophe is the same as in a fairy tale. You know, at some point, no matter what happens, that turn that we know has happened, that's the eucatastrophe of the human story, is the incarnation, which in turn, the cross is the eucatastrophe of that. Then you know it's going to end well. But as Ron Dart would say if he were here, Well, it's good news, but there are all kinds of people right now in Ukraine, just to name one place, that believe in this, but that's very cold comfort right now too. Not just because it's cold there.
Yeah.
Maybe if we were there, we would be gathered around a candle or a little fire and find that it is comfort just the same. Or
Yeah, yeah,
I don't
yeah.
dare to speak. I can only speak of my own candle.
Yeah, yeah.
Or be singing. What I'm struck by the gatherings in a community in Western Ukraine where they gather every day and sing.
Yeah. And with candles, I've seen those videos.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how important this is to ask a question about, David, but you might wish to comment on. Remember that passage of St. Paul, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. And some take that as just hubris on his part. I always have taken that to mean that right now Christ isn't amongst us, so we want to imitate Christ. But maybe there's something in how I'm representing the gospel that you can benefit from. I like to think that's the way Illich might have understood his life. And certainly that's the way you have understood it. Would that not be true, David? As one, not to imitate in every single way. I mean, no one's going to be peripatetic like him ever, probably, in terms of the brilliance with which he did that and so on. But to imitate a whole approach to life which is centered around friendship. Well, that's a wonderful imitation to call people to. And I suppose, I'm sure Illich would never have said that of himself. But would that be a kind of an accurate way of thinking of Illich, that his life is so imitable for us in our attempts to live our lives well and as Christians?
I think it's perfectly right. I mean, the thing that I thought of when you were speaking is I've more than once mentioned Lee Hoynatsky,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and sometimes compared him to Sancho Panza, to Ivan's Don Quixote. But they were friends going back to, Lee was a Dominican priest in New York and went to Ivan's Institute in Puerto Rico in the late 50s, and they became lifelong friends at that point. But Lee wrote an essay after Ivan died in which he tried to come to grips with how he had dealt with his illness. And it was never, I mean, it's probably disputed among some to this day what actually was the case, right? Because Lee has a story, it's actually published, of the sort of ambush biopsy in Chicago, which others of Illich's friends deny, which somehow I like that. But whatever was the case, he chose to leave this illness untreated. And I think it was not because others should always leave their illnesses untreated, or indeed that others should derive any practical advice whatsoever from it. That's what he felt was right for him in his circumstances. I think he was mindful that of what he had written about suffering, and the loss of the art of suffering and the consequences of the loss of the art of suffering, which he laid at the door of modern medicine's ambition, and making every suffering a failure of treatment, deprived it of its in any inherent dignity. he had a lot of other reasons, but Lee argued in this essay that Ivan suffered for others also. And how was that? Well, I think we watched him. We saw him. We saw how he lived with this. And it was a remarkable thing to see. I had the idea always that it was that in this bonfire of pain, things were being consumed that he wished to be consumed. That was within him. Certainly he got sweeter and sweeter, and most of the asperity, you might say, of a proud man disappeared during those years, and was already, I think, in the process of disappearing when we became closely connected. But certainly it inspired others in a way, but not in a way that you'd have to be very careful in trying to specify. Right? You could so easily get it wrong, right? And yet it was something to imitate, but it wasn't. I mean, imitation is not a very good word, is it?
Because it isn't. Yeah,
it sounds like copying.
Yeah,
and yet we don't have
like a photocopy.
We don't. I mean, but I mean, Girard says, that we should imitate Christ. The reason we should imitate Christ is because he's the only one who won't imitate us back.
Yeah.
Now, if Paul is proud, he's claiming that he's another one who won't imitate back, and perhaps he was. I'm not judging him, but yeah, the danger of imitation is always, and I think Ivan lived with that all his life. I mean, any charismatic and highly gifted person will have to live with the knowledge that others are going to imitate them to their peril, right? They're going to be excessively influenced. And I think it leads probably in many to a kind of shielding also, or at least focusing of one's power. But some of it, I think, just has to be swallowed as part of the tragedy, even if it's not finally a tragedy, that a lot of people somewhat cracked up around him. They were overcome. They were overturned. They drove off the road. They drove off the road in a way, right? So, and that, I think that's in the nature of, I mean, if his story about Christianity is true, then obviously we've seen that as a planetary or a global drama. How hard it is to understand who the Messiah is and who the Messiah isn't. What the coming of the Messiah portends and what it doesn't portend. So, but in his little world, he also dealt with that, I think, right? But yeah, I mean, I like the word example as far as it would go for me. It's not
model. Model, maybe? Yeah.
Well, model is kind of ruined for me.
Yeah. I agree.
Because we've been through quite a bit of modeling. I get it. to our cost. And the idea that everyone that you can know the future, that you should know the future, and that you should act in the present on the basis of the future you've predicted is how that is compatible with a messianic outlook that seeks and is receptive to surprise. Is anyone's guess, but it's certainly a prime instance of the need for balance, right? The excessive claims that were made for models and the amount of harm that was done by following models that proved to be wildly inaccurate. I don't think there's been any reckoning. I don't think it's really been faced. I don't hear a lot of sorrow or gnashing of teeth or people rending their garments. The people
maybe that's yet to come with a crash of some kind.
Just quickly back to
the day we see young Justin rending his garments will be
yes, I think that'll
be a day.
But quickly back to suffering, just for a moment. There's that little passage in the book of Hebrews that says he learned obedience by the things he suffered. And there was a saying at the time of Christ, mathein, pathein in Greek, that translated trivially more so, we say no gain, no pain, but to learn is to suffer, right?
He learned obedience by the things he suffered.
Things he suffered.
Yeah.
Little phrase in the book of Hebrews.
Well, that's true of Ivan.
Yeah.
He wanted to learn obedience above all, and he did learn obedience by the things he suffered.
Yeah. And so in that way, that's whatever word we can put in, because I see Catherine has also said influencer, the model, all these words don't really, imitation, they don't really work, but whatever it is, that's something we face all in our lives, and to hopefully a good end of learning obedience in the way that you describe it in the last chapters as well. So.
Is obedience a kind of imitation, though? I mean, I suppose what you're imitating is the will of the person to whom you've discipled yourself, right?
That's very good. Thank you, George.
It's funny, Ivan, the letter he wrote to me in 1987 saying that he would allow me to come and see him. He said he would be obedient. And I at the time, I think obedience didn't have any more than its colloquial significance for me. And it was interesting to ponder what that meant, right? Because it certainly didn't mean imitating me. And it certainly didn't mean doing everything I said. So the closest, in a way, I could come to it was that it meant attending. And dancing would be maybe another image to take me fully seriously at whatever cost that might involve for him. That was in a certain way what obedience meant, right?
Which is of the essence in friendship. Would that not be the case?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
In fact, David, when I pitched the idea of doing something like we've been doing, I remember you responded back. I think these are the exact words. I am your obedient servant, and I felt that was, that was a gesture of friendship. I mean, it kind of, and I knew that was an Illich way of saying it, but clearly, you've internalized it, and to me that was sweet. Would be the word to say, the way you said it. So thank you.
Hmm.
Well,
I
look
was
look what came back.
Yeah.
What's the beginning of that poem, Catherine? What's the first line?
Yeah.
That she says this blessing is.
Let me find it again.
And
This
Catherine,
blessing.
maybe, oh, sorry, maybe we could have that at the very end too.
Sure.
The whole thing at the end. Would that be a good way to, when we're ready to close off? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. But yeah, the blessing cannot help it. It's the way it was designed.
The blessing can't help it. That's what I like.
Yeah. Which it was reminding me of what you were just saying, David, about Illich's being obedient. I was reminded of something Jens has written about Bonhoeffer using Paul Ricoeur to think about identity as ultimately rooted in responsiveness and relationality.
Mhm.
And so that reality is relational, and it plays on a number of thinkers, but the idea that he brings to center on Bonhoeffer is that it's the idea that that God presents in the face of the other, and my identity is to hear the call of the other, which you've used that term, the call, and to say, here I am,
Hmm.
here I am.
Hanani, it's a phrase that recurs frequently in the Hebrew Bible. It's it's the phrase used by Abraham in response to God's call.
Hmm. And Mary too, right?
Yeah.
Hanani.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to thinking about how even Genesis is God calling, follow me. In a way, fiat, the calling forth is, and then the response. It's like a call and response. You can call it a dance. You can call it
Mhm.
putting a whole multiple of voices in motion, and they're not all the same.
That's called
A call.
antiphonal or something, isn't that the musical term?
Yeah.
Yeah. David, you were talking, I was intrigued by something you were saying about obedience as attending to somebody, or I guess you could say making yourself available to somebody, which I think is related to this idea of Hanani, here I am, right?
Yeah.
So Hanani is not here I am, I'm in this spot, you know where to find me, but it's like here I am for you, at your service, right?
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, David, I know you're real familiar with the work of Simone Weil. So I mean, would you connect that with Weil's notion of attention?
Mm.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
I would. Yeah. I don't know what more to say, but yes, I would.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah,
Can
because
you elaborate? Can you elaborate on it, George?
I don't know that I can, other than to say that's what was brought to mind by what what David was saying. I also think of Emmanuel Levinas, right, the great French Lithuanian Jewish philosopher of the last century, who for whom this theme of obedience to the other is also important, and so when we encounter somebody, if it's a genuine encounter, the face of the other is speaking to us even before the other person utters a word, right? The face speaks, he says, right? um, and the face speaks, and it also indicts us in a way of our self preoccupation, and essentially what the self is saying is I mean, you can, yeah, that you're not the world, right?
Exactly.
You know, which can be tough to swallow sometimes,
Mhm.
right? It's something that we need to be reminded of continually, and we often ignore those reminders. But again, it seems that's also, in my mind, related to this. That that the obedience is to let go of ourselves, right, and make ourselves available, to the other person. And how we do that, how that plays out in reality, is and I think this is also related to a theme from from Illich, that it's not predetermined. There's not a set of rules as to how we are to respond to the other.
George,
Uh,
if you don't mind, I'll interrupt only because Taylor has to leave. He's just
oh, I'm
sent a
sorry.
note.
Okay,
No,
I'm
no, it's
sorry.
not your fault at all. But Taylor, if you're still there, do you want to just say something before you head off to pick up your kids? He's left
Gone.
already, I guess.
Gone.
Okay, I'm sorry, George. I didn't want to cut in, but I think he was hesitant too, and I thought, oh, I guess I'm allowed. So
Okay,
continue
okay.
on. Sorry, George.
Oh well, I maybe I run out of things to say, but I mean, for me, all of these things tie together, and the idea of otherness, that is the idea of an open future, the idea of freedom, the freedom that we now have because our response to the other is not something that is prescribed, and in the way that it would be in a more traditional society where what is owed to you is predetermined by what relationship to each other we stand in, right? But it seems like all of that can be related to this idea of obedience as a kind of full availability, full presence to the other.
Reminds me
About attention. I mean, in Vey, it probably corresponds to what Illich calls awareness, right? As in celebration of awareness. Attention is the power that belongs to us. To what we attend to is what will determine everything. And in Vey also, of course, it has also the implication of waiting, right? I'm forgetting some of the French, but her first book that appeared in English, I think, well, maybe Gravity and Grace was the first, but what was called translated as Waiting for God, right? En attente de Dieu, I think. So attention also had the valence of waiting on, which goes nicely with obedience and attention, as receptivity, which is what Illich calls hoping for surprises. Right?
and there's that Donne quote, right? They also serve who stand and wait.
Yeah. They also serve who stand and wait. Yeah, nice.
Well, maybe I'll jump in here.
Yeah.
One area of my life where I'm trying to practice genuine friendship and obedience and taking the other fully seriously. I like that. Is in friendships with indigenous friends, both Christian and non-Christian indigenous, and trying to get to know endings. And I was thinking about, as you were talking about the shadow, I was thinking about the trickster figure, who's very important in many indigenous spiritual traditions. I think, and I'm curious, this is kind of a question more about like, how do you hold some things together in your head, David, rather than maybe how Illich held things together. Because I'm thinking of some things I learned from Girard as well, and um, like I have a sense of you, David, as someone who is kind of a gracious host to quite a few different voices in your head, and sometimes I get the sense that you're just happy to like welcome them all to the party and let them work things out amongst themselves.
That's how to describe David's whole career in broadcasting. That's perfect.
Sure, you go over there and talk to Illich.
Yeah, that's right.
I got to talk to this other guy.
Yeah, and like harmonizing it all into the understanding of David Cayley seems like sometimes like that's less your business than really being hospitable to all these different voices. But I guess I do want like one of the things I learned from Girard was, when he talks about I see Satan fall like lightning, there's the sense of the Christian revelation of really turning, this pivotal turn away from the archaic sacred, where violence and God are kind of all shot through with each other, and there's this kind of murky, messy, there is the kind of God who's able to send, make deals with his buddy the devil and throw Job under the bus.
Right.
And that from what I understand of Girard, like a key aspect of the revelation of Christ is that God has nothing to do with all that nastiness, all that nasty business. And so I think, when I hear about the trickster figure, I get more of a sense of a tradition that's still kind of embracing this murky mix of the archaic sacred.
Right.
And I do think of myself in some ways as a kind of like very, very long game evangelist. like maybe if people really reclaim and their sense of who they are, maybe my grandkids and their grandkids will have some conversations where we'll finally have some sense of what it might mean for the gospel to interact in a respectful way with this culture. That kind of long game. But I guess I do like. I'm curious how you embrace that sense of the shadow of this kind of inevitable shadow that comes with Christianity, and how you distinguish that from a return to a sense of the divine that once again kind of is kind of recontaminated with the bloodiness of human politics, let's say. How is being honest and open about the kind of tragic inevitability even of that shadow? How can that somehow still be a move forward instead of a move back towards the archaic sacred that mixes those things?
Well, that question lives on a lot of levels for me, as I'm sure for you, because it's a question about Canada now. Canada, as many other societies as well. I mean, how can right now it seems like a battle of untrue stereotypes is called reconciliation, right? So you've got evil Christianity,
right,
battling imaginary indigenous spirituality. or some kind of crazy dream of innocence. So you don't have any reality in the conversation at all. And obviously, I hope that will be overcome. That's not always true, right? I mean, I'm reading just now Thompson Highway's memoir, Permanent Astonishment. Have you read it?
No, but I'm a bit familiar with his voice, and
it's a wonderful book. But I mean, that spirit of self-righteousness is just absent from it, right? It's just, he sees the comedy of the Christians. He sees he has a deeply comic spirit, which he plausibly claims is also in a certain way the spirit of his people.
Yeah,
just
I
the
think
priest.
that's true.
And also the spirit of the language, which he loves. And so I don't want to make a generalization, which, whenever I'm in his presence, I feel that's absolutely not true. But for myself, I think the answer is humor, is understanding that humor is ultimate for human beings. It isn't a joke that you get past, or that it's funny all the way down. It's, Ivan said, when two hear the gospel, one gets it, like the punchline of a joke. He said that if he'd finished reading a gospel story,
right,
or a Bible story, he knew he'd understood it when he smiled. When it raised a smile. I mean, you could carry that too far, but it seems to me that that's exactly what I was saying before, that it's my conclusion that contradiction is ultimate in the realm of necessity.
Right.
Right.
Well, and that, I mean,
wherever I may go in silence, I will not say it to you in words, because the words will obey necessity. They'll say more than I want. They'll say less than I want. They'll say what I don't want at all. They'll start you herring off on God knows what adventure, right? It'll be, all that will be of necessity.
Yeah.
So.
And in the end, we'll all be able to laugh at ourselves.
Well, one hopes.
That's our Christian hope, in a sense, I think.
Yeah, that's what I think that
We've lost you, Marcus, a bit.
As I've understood it.
No, there he is.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that you're okay now.
You're good.
It seems like it seems like it's always just at the pickup that there's a little bit of a lag. Sorry.
Yeah.
That it reminds me of, if I think I have this correct, that if one listens to a trickster story properly, one laughs at oneself.
Yeah.
So it's not the murkiness of the trickster of Nanabush. It's not to justify the violence of the gods or the corruption of the gods. The point is to give the human community some figure in which they can recognize themselves and laugh at themselves, and be healed in the process. Right. I think like, I mean, Girard talks about the action of the Holy Spirit as continually sort of revealing the innocence of those who get hurt by the mythic and the religious, and continually revealing the full kindness, let's say, of the holy. And I take very seriously that the Holy Spirit has been active here long before the missionaries arrived.
Oh, sure.
And so I think I can, in that sense, it's not difficult at all to see the way the trickster figure becomes a tool or a venue for the Holy Spirit to work among indigenous people who had their own path away from, some very bloody, sacrificial
Yeah.
ways of creating their togetherness. That I think you're right. We're not honest about in the typical Canadian conversations about the project of reconciliation. But I thank you for reminding. I was a bit surprised by how quickly you turned to the answer of humor, but I'm struck by actually how profound an answer that is, and how well it connects to my sense of the spirit of Indigenous Canadians. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's so beautiful in Highway's book, but that's been true of a lot of people that I've known. So it doesn't seem to just apply to Cree culture by any means.
Yeah.
And Thomas King's book, David, Indians on Vacation, is delightful, right? He has,
well, the dead dog. I still
yeah, he has
laugh
such a
sometimes
wry
thinking
sense
about
of
the
humor,
dead dog cafe, right?
Yeah.
But which was, but yeah, I mean, humor. That's probably not a good word. Erasmus has in praise of folly, which follows this point, and Ivan referring to our Savior as a fool is that's the level of it, I think.
Right.
It's foolishness. It's not just ha ha humor. It's awareness of foolishness, and what must always appear as foolishness against the backdrop of necessity, and when itself made necessary becomes impossible, becomes what we've been talking about. So as far as my cocktail party of thinkers is concerned, it's been a lot of fun, but I don't think, for me, it's perhaps this. I'm doing a book on the CBC now, and what in the end I probably want to counsel is something I haven't a word for, which I'm calling deep pluralism, right? But it's finally that recognition that nobody has the answer, and in the end, you can only tell a story in which contradictory positions can all have their voice. So yeah, it's been my good fortune in a way, in a time when people get stranded in their clubs very readily, I think, and even find it a professional necessity to be stranded in their clubs, right?
Yeah.
That my way of life allowed me to be a boundary hopper.
I'm conscious that it is almost 20 after 2, and in the spirit of sort of staying within the frame of 2 hours, 20 after 2 here, sorry, I'm sorry. We've almost come up to the end of 2 hours. I wonder if, Catherine, again, you would maybe at the very end do that lovely reading. That's a powerful reading, and I know you've sent out the link. And we just thought a couple of things. It might be good to ask what is the will of everyone about, we've come to the conclusion of discussions more or less of David's book, but is there a will in any way to continue? And we don't have to answer that at all, but if a few people wish to throw that out. But also, David, obviously, we want to give opportunity to express thanks to you in verbally. There'll be something else coming, but we would like to start with that. So maybe, could we do that first? And then if anyone, when you're doing it, wants to add an idea about what maybe to do, we'll throw them all out. But let's not take too long. So, well, put it this way. I presume people would like to stay within the 2 hours. So just to allow for that. So we have about 10 minutes to do all that. So.
I'm not on a tight schedule. My son is coming over at some point, and I have to make myself available to him when he does arrive.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
not certain when he'll arrive. He might come at 6. So
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
free until he turns up.
Yeah, and I guess then people are free to leave as they must, and perhaps anyone that knows you need to leave right away, maybe if we do go beyond a half hour, you would like to speak up first and expressing to David or whatever you wish.
Well, I see Catherine's going to have to leave by 2:30, so we're going to have her read a bit of
Yeah.
a clear end. I'll just, I mean, gosh, David, you were this guy that I listened to on the radio, and then on my phone in the garden, I can still picture the potato patch that I was in when I first heard about Simone Weil through your programming, and kind of fell in love with her through the voice of your daughter, who did
That's
such a
nice.
lovely reading. And here we are having conversation. It's yeah, I mean, I've said to others, I sort of think of you as the person who curated my post bachelor theological education. And imagination for, I think, yeah, hopping boundaries and all the things one can learn and think about and enjoy for free. Like
That's nice.
outside, I didn't have to go get a damn PhD somewhere, or like I could just engage, and I'm just grateful for that freedom, and grateful for the freedom of these conversations again, which have kind of continued that adventure of learning and some sense of relationship, which is a surprise and a gift. So thanks.
You're welcome.
Catherine, maybe we should hear from, I'm sorry, David, but maybe right after you respond, David, Catherine, just to give you a bit of time too. Yeah. David, you were going to respond. I'm sorry.
No, I just said you're welcome. That was my whole remark.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
I resonate with what a thrill it is to be present to the face. That was the voice on the radio takes a face and says, here am I. Well, I can't remember what that Hebrew word was, but I'm just so
Hineni.
grateful. Okay, Hineni. This has been a really timely group for me because of my church is imploding and not
That's
feeling.
a story.
Yeah, it's a story, but for another
But you're not
time.
going to tell it now.
I'm not going to tell it now. But just to say that it has been the church for me in many ways, of steadying and inviting to be more permeable and to not take a hard stance on either side, and to be listening to the Spirit and determine how much I should be speaking up, how much I should be involved, and how much I need to just keep learning before I say anything. So I'm grateful for thinking about the gospel as a way of life, And to me, Illich is just your way of presenting him, your way of being has enriched that understanding for me that this is a way of life. And in that way of life is a relationality and a responsiveness that isn't in a hurry and is ready for surprise. So that's what I am grateful for, David. And to the rest of you, thank you for your hospitality. And
Can I
would
ask
you like, yes,
one question? Is
Yeah.
is this COVID related? What's happening in your church?
well, isn't everything? I mean,
Well,
it's definitely because of COVID that it's explosive the way it is, but
yeah.
the alphabetization and how you were explaining how sex and gender have it's been a shift in the way that we take up identity, that we can't seem to speak about complementarity anymore in a way that is welcoming and responsive. It has a
Okay.
lot to do with
Right.
that. So yeah, to leave blessing everyone rather than cursing is a real gift. It's a real gift.
So
Would you like me
Catherine,
to read?
yeah, if you're willing, or yeah, it would be good to hear it in your voice once again, and then we'll give you a farewell, and we'll continue on for a while, I'm sure. But it would be great, please.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So Jan Richardson, I'll read the epigraph again. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Mark 8:35. Blessing in the round. This blessing cannot help it. It's the way it was designed. Lay it down and it rises again. Release it and it returns. Give it away and it makes a path back to you. There is no explaining how it delights in reappearing when you have ceased to hold it. No hiding the sly smile it wears when it shows up at your door. No mistaking the wonder when it circles back around just at the moment you thought you had spent it completely, had poured it out with abandon, where you saw the deepest thirst for it, had put it entirely in the hands of those desperate in their hunger. But here it is, the perfect circle of it, pressing into your hand that curls around it and then lets go, receiving and releasing and receiving again, like the breath that does not belong to us, but sets us in motion.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right,
I'll be in touch.
good.
Okay,
Do
great,
that.
Catherine.
Do that.
Blessings. Well, I'm thinking that given our time, maybe we'll just finish off with, we'll continue to express our thanks. And I think we can, maybe I'll put out an email or something like that and just ask for some input from everyone, and then you can copy everyone. Maybe that's better than spending time now, because I think others of us would like the opportunity to express thanks. If that sounds okay to everyone? Yeah, okay. I see you, Marcus, thanks.
David, I'll just say thanks. I hear my daughters roaming around upstairs, so that means I think I have to go up and help them with supper. But it's it's been wonderful to be here, and it's been quite a shift from my day job and all that's going on these days as we go through the the remnants of the pandemic and stuff. And it's been quite a delight to be here. It's really pushed me to get the reading done, but I managed. I managed to get through your book and Putin's People. I don't know whether you know that book or not, but Catherine Belton I'm trying to understand what's going on over in Ukraine and Russia. So I've been doing a lot of reading lately. But I just, in light of Marcus's, I have an image of you standing in the potato patch listening to David, Marcus, now, that I'll associate with you. But I realize, our paths have crossed a number of times and in a number of places, and I'm just grateful that that's happened again. And I feel, since moving east from Toronto, I desperately miss the big city, and I don't get there very often. So I'm actually coming next month. So, I may come looking for you when I do a road trip with my daughter, and come and go to Toronto for a few days and visit family and other things. But it's been a delight, and I'm really grateful. Not only to have been in this conversation with you and Wayne, but to have met others along the road here, and so it'll be interesting to see what other adventures we might be able to get up to again. So thank you, and be of good courage.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thanks to Hugh. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. So my acquaintance with Hugh goes back about, I think the same amount of time as you and I, Wayne.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, 30
When,
years about. It was 1992 when I listened to your interview with Niels Christie that led me to write to you, and we got started there.
Yeah, and Hugh was
about the same time.
Another of Niels Christie's many gifts to me was Hugh.
Yeah, I agree.
And Hugh was part of a series of broadcasts I did called The Expanding Prison, which related to the beginning of their circles of support.
Which continues and has gone very well.
Right. Yeah. So it was very sweet to see him again, and I hope he and his daughter will call when they come.
Oh, I think they'll try.
That'll be good. All right.
Do you want me to just invite people? Okay. Matthew, I see you next on the screen to David. Are you willing to say anything just in?
Sure, yeah. David, this has been such a total delight, and your openness of spirit, your generosity. Someone mentioned about the kind of the patient, slowness isn't the right word, but it's this very calm, carrying things through, and your invitation to being, I think you used the word boundary hopper. The porousness, it is so refreshing, and it's also really refreshing. It's timely now. I mean, as we all know, things are seemingly so polarized, and it's creating divisions in friendship. And the words that you have used in your book and in the discussion and what's come up has been an invitation to be more open, but to be more open in a truly vulnerable but real way, because it's easy to have this idea. Some people will talk, Buber and dialogue, and we just need to get into dialogue, but it seems like there needs to be some other steps first to take. We're not just going to jump into dialogue, because we have to have the obedience, the vulnerability, the willingness to actually have that we're not the only ones. Our ways of seeing aren't the only ways of seeing. And you have so helped me to see more, to hear more, to perceive differently. And I really, really, really appreciate it. I look forward to, my vote would be anything that would have us continue with you would be more than absolutely wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Ivan used to say that the gift of good counsel is in the hearer. So think of my pleasure in being understood and listened to in the way that I have been by this group. It doesn't happen every day by any means. So thank you.
I see that Rodney has had to leave.
Was Rod ever here?
Yeah, he was.
He
He
didn't
was
show
here
up on,
virtually the whole session today.
okay. I didn't
Yeah.
see him on my little.
Yeah, there's a
you-
limited number of boxes they showed.
Oh,
so-
okay. So that's not everybody who was
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, we were about 9 people for most of the time, but you had to click to the right, and you may not have seen that on your
Okay, wait a
little
minute.
arrow.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, but
You
it went
click to
right
the
now.
right of the
Well,
row.
except that right now we're you probably see
This
5
is all
people.
of us now
That's all of us right
who are
now.
left.
Yeah.
Okay, well, who else? Rod was there.
Yeah.
Taylor.
Taylor had to leave.
I
and
saw Taylor, but
Catherine,
okay.
Catherine, and so that's up to 8. Boy, isn't that funny? You know, I think we were 9. So there's one
Okay,
more
all right.
person. I'm
Well,
leaving out.
Hugh was left.
Oh, Hugh, of course. Yeah, of course.
Hugh
He's
was there,
just
yeah,
left, of
yeah.
course. Yeah, so that
Okay,
I
good.
think that's what I counted. So George, I know you've joined us just this time, but I know you're very keen in this whole area on Illich, but also on David's work and so on. So do you have some comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, well, like everybody else, I want to express my gratitude to David, who I've known for several decades now, although David has not known me, not gotten to know me until quite recently. But I first read, first got to know who David was by reading his conversations with George Grant.
Wow.
And then I also read his conversations with Illich, which I believe was the second thing that I read by Ivan Illich. The first being his notorious book, Gender, which interestingly, I was drawn to that because of the theme of complementarity.
Okay.
And I was very, very impressed by that book. And at the time, I was not aware that it was so reviled. But I think it's I think it's an amazing book, and I think it's a real tragedy that that kind of what shall I say, derailed his celebrity status for a while. But anyway, I know David to be a very gracious man because I've emailed him on a couple occasions, and he's been very generous in responding to my emails and answering my questions. And I'm very I want to thank everybody for putting up with me today. I know you guys don't know me. I'm like Marcus. I think we've had some interactions on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I hope I didn't talk too much, and I hope and I hope I didn't ramble too much. I haven't slept much in the past couple of days because I'm finishing up some rather massive project thing I've been writing. So I hope I didn't make an ass of myself, and I hope I didn't take up too much time. But
Can friends ever make asses?
Not at all. Not at all, George.
Not at all.
But I want to thank all of you for your hospitality, and if this is continued in some form, and if I'm invited to join you again, that would be wonderful.
You're invited. That's easy.
Okay, thank you.
That's easily said, I think, on behalf of everyone, because it is an open circle that way we felt from the beginning. So who knows? And I'll initiate then an email in some way that will get you on as well, George. I think maybe I don't have it, but I'll get it from Ron, your email address. Well, I think then I'll now David may still want to add something at the end, but in a way, Catherine has closed it off as she began. But I would like to hold this up. I've lit it every time, and rereading these last the last 2 chapters in particular, there's just something that almost makes my spine tingle every time that I read this. So I'll reread it today. It was in our readings anyway, and it's also the one of the epigraphs. On the table, well, I'm holding it now, there is always a candle. Why? Because the text that shaped my understanding was a treatise on spiritual friendship by the 12th century abbot Ired of Rivaux. It begins with the words, "Here we are, you and I hope also a third who is Christ." If you consider his meaning carefully, you understand that it could be Christ in the form of Brother Michael. In other words, our conversation should always go on with the certainty that there is somebody else who will knock at the door, and the candle stands for him or her. It is a constant reminder that the community is never closed. And so, David, I just say simply, as long as I've known you, the community has never felt closed. And that's a huge gift in my life. So thank you.
Oh, Wayne, this has been a joy. It really has. And I thank you for having the idea. And I'm quite open to any sequel that may take place from time to time.
So we'll see. We'll see.
So, yeah, I hate to say goodbye, but
I'm sure we'll take you. We will take you up on. We will take you up on that in some way. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to make. You have to, maybe you're. What about that trip to the Learned that you had to cancel, Marcus? You were going to come and. You were going to come and see me.
Oh yeah, right.
Well, it's going to be in Western. I mean, and then it all got canceled.
Yeah, well, and then they did it online a year later. So
okay, I'm getting off in a minute. Sorry, that's my
we
call.
better let you go, David.
I came and went electronically, so I don't know when I might be out that way.
Well, I guess maybe I got to come to you. We'll see.
Okay.
Anyway,
that would be great fun.
Farewell, all.
Bless you all.
Thank you so much.
I'm going. My son's here. I gotta go.
All right. Go see your son.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.